Thank you, Jericho. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you to the library and to the book festival. It's really wonderful to be able to celebrate poetry today with everyone. So I'm going to read from my new book, which just came out, Mother, Water, Ash. And it is a book which is, as Jericho said, about my mother's sudden death and also about the destruction of the Gulf Coast. And I wrote a book about Hurricane Katrina and my parents' experience during the storm that came out in 2010 called Breach. But I realized when my mother died suddenly in 2018, I began returning to thinking about the hurricane and the city of New Orleans that she was very wedded to, and all this stuff started swirling in my head. So I'm going to start with the first poem in the book, which is called On the Mississippi River Levee, Styrofoam Cup in My Hand. And I think the only thing I need to tell you is that I grew up 2 blocks from the Mississippi. On the Mississippi River Levee, styrofoam cup in my hand that will disintegrate in 500 years. I drink my coffee, stand in gravel in my church skirt, black velvet I wore to my mother's funeral 11 days ago. Take a photo of my own shadow on the railroad tracks to Snapchat to my daughters. While this river outside my parents' house is rising higher than in years. Spillways opened, live oaks sunk in mud, grass littered with plastic bags and beer cans. Levee trash, a photo essay, my former self might think. That self so well-versed in irony, that careful daughter who would take notes, then shut her notebook. Now on the levee, a white truck speeds by too fast. Maybe a man who picks up shifts on rigs for extra money. And in a former life, I'd write a poem about how that man might be dangerous to my daughters. Now I write nothing. I am here to walk off my restless sadness, to walk off my mother's voice years ago after the storm when the city flooded, telling me she will never leave New Orleans, no matter how high water rises or how many times levees breach, telling me she will die in her house. No evacuations, no hospitals. Now I know grief has its own typography. Mine is this city and this coast. So in the book, I have 5 poems which are all titled Missing. And I'm going to read one of those. It's a prose poem. Missing. Grief is rage and it is a visible thing, I text to myself. Not a brick hurled at a face or a fist in the throat, but this, my mother's red striped shirt that she will never wear again, lying on the floor. Or later at the columbarium, the low drag of the screws shutting up a marble slab, just ashes in a box. My mother hidden, sealed, gone. I am too full of rage, I text to myself. On the plane down to New Orleans after she is dead. And beside me is a grandma holding a fussy baby. And when I try to connect with her, as I do with anyone holding a baby on a plane, she looks at me blankly. It's just separation anxiety, she says. That first night in New Orleans, texted to myself while I lie on the couch wearing my mother's nightgown. Everywhere I am is a place I don't want to be. Okay. So another thing that happens in this book is I have some untitled short poems which are about the environmental crisis that we're all living in and the Gulf Coast in particular, and I'm going to read one of those. I should also say that it's really funny, working on this book, I reflected back on a class I took in high school on Louisiana ecology, which actually really stayed with me. And we did field trips, we went to Barrier Islands and we learned all about the Gulf Coast and New Orleans and water and floods and all that. And it really sparked an interest in me as a teenager, one that I've kept up with. So, once the coastline spoke, I planned to disappear and tell you nothing. Geographic body etched on a map. Count the houses where families live, where a river splinters, saltwater surges through a channel built for ships and oil, dredged and levied. Children die. To myself, I spoke, You need to be less daughter. You need to go home to your own daughters, to be a mother, to stop walking the Mississippi's edge. But the Gulf is burning, marshes disappearing, sidewalk buckling like a choking throat. The coastline advises, count my waves, count the days your mother has been gone, count the hurricanes, the floods, the times the water unspooled and didn't drown the town. So I'm gonna read two more poems, and let's see. So this poem is called My Mother's Ashtray. My mother's ashtray, with the last of her DNA, gold clamshell I snapped shut, now shoved under my couch to avoid, also to save. While I want my mother to return to offer me a list of how I failed to snip a strand of her hair at the funeral home for safekeeping, how I never wore the skirts she sewed me after my first love left, how when she visited to help with my babies, I refused to let her smoke in the house, demanded she sit on the cold porch with the ashtray. Without her now, I am back at the dark corner of myself. The old urge to step out of my body, drop it on the floor like a crumpled dress, skip a meal, run harder, as I lie on the floor of my daughter's room, fevered and finally asleep, too old for this. In the middle of the night, I will my mother to come back, to slip the ashtray out from underneath the couch. Ashtray I won't empty. Should I save the butts her lips once touched? Their own museum exhibit. She won't return, which means I fail my mother. We called the skirts she made the guilt skirts. They still drape, folded stiff on a hanger beside my girls' dresses and her nightgowns my father gave me. I know she kept the ashtray secret from my daughters, under the couch, ashed and ready, just as I collect my teenage daughter's baby clothes in a box, ruffled toddler dress, blue sleep sack, just as I wear my mother's raincoat now, as if my body could ever be equivalent to hers. I flip the ashtray open like a beer can or a jewelry box, a bed warmer to be held against a hearth fire. I research ashtrays on eBay to avoid myself, to not finish this poem, in which my mother is finally dead, and I have the evidence in my house, this stick handle like a wrist. And I'm just gonna close with a short poem, which is called Down River. And it does make reference to the Great Flood of 1927, the Great Mississippi Flood. And a really important fact about that is that basically the levees were blown up to flood the Black neighborhoods outside of New Orleans. Down River. The storm is a girl on the edge of fury, in a dress the color of lead. Not the girl I once was, too easy. Let's talk about downriver parishes no one knows the names of. Not a spill of moonlight, no cool, loose dirt. Let's talk about a river, thrashing, blinking open. No lovely blur, but a wrecked yellow shotgun, splintered, crushed. Yes, I am talking about dynamite. Yes, downriver is a word. Take it apart. I am talking about the levee at Carnarvon, no metaphor, only spill, only break, only explode, not edge. Yet how often I walked the Mississippi shore, mud sunk, swirl of storm, no, too lovely, tall river grass, levee stunned open, glow of a silvered moon between split trees, a body swept and dredged. Thank you.